Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with veteran San Francisco-based jazz pianist Dave Miller. We caught up with him to talk about his newest 2021 CD with his trio called The Mask-erade Is Over on Summit Records. During the past few years, he has been featured on a variety of memorable recordings, including his own. His day job is as a lawyer, and he uses both roles in his life very well. He grew up in Long Island, New York, having extensive classical piano lessons and learned to play jazz by ear. He was inspired early on by the great George Shearing's recordings and seeing Ahmad Jamal in concert. His story is one you should hear. Enjoy.
Hi, Joe. Nice to meet you.
Hey, nice to meet you, man. How you doing?
I'm doing just great. Just finished a meeting of a legal nature since I'm a lawyer by day, and so this is a real pleasure.
Good. Good. It's a nice departure. Well, hey, thanks again for taking a minute out, and I want to dive in first and foremost with your newest CD with the trio, The Mask-erade Is Over. And I want to know, it's coming out during the tail end of a pandemic, a very strange time, not a lot of live gigs going on. How do you feel about this coming out now with the prospect of possible live gigs and all of that?
Frankly, we planned it that way. It's very rare that we planned anything along these lines, but as you probably know, we did two recordings during the pandemic. One, the Someday recording with Rebecca and the trio. We felt when we went into the studio, which was in Oakland, we've been there before many times, and it's really good and spread out. We were masked, separated. We felt that this was a way to channel our energy during the pandemic, be creative, try to think of themes that relate to the pandemic, knowing that at the back end of this we'd be looking at, relief of some sort, a new world, a reopening, a rebirth. And so we wanted to use this opportunity when we couldn't be performing in public to go into the studio. And so Someday came out about 4 months ago, and then this trio recording was scheduled to come out right now. And here we are, live music back and gigs happening. And we've been busy, and things are picking up all over here, despite the new surge, if you will, that's plaguing our region, probably yours as well, and some new mask orders for indoors. I should say we've been playing outdoors since February as well in public and remain outdoors. I'm not going indoors to play for a while yet.
I guess that's my next question is about the album. Like, what do you ultimately want the listener to get from this experience? How do you want them to feel about this CD?
I'm going to depart from thinking about it in terms of looking back at the pandemic, but it really may be something that life could continue and music could continue when everything else was shut down, and you had some creativity that was taking place, at least from our vantage point, during a time when we were otherwise isolated and everyone else was, and would want people to experience the pleasure of music again, ideally in live settings, but enjoy a recording, hopefully, that was undertaken under circumstances when we were otherwise very much confined and people were not hearing new music.
I guess, and one other thing, too, is, everybody during this time of quarantine and lockdown, you really had to, kind of look in the mirror and examine yourself. What did you find out about yourself that maybe you didn't know before, or what are you going to be stronger about now as you reemerge and get more out there with your album and live gigs?
Yeah, that's a very thoughtful question, because as I think back during this period, in my case, I think I was a lot more fortunate than many. Everybody suffered, don't get me wrong. My office was shut down. I haven't been in my office in more than a year, working on Zoom, trying to play music on Zoom, trying to communicate on Zoom. But I was relatively fortunate because my family was nearby, and so many others suffered so much more than I did by having separation. So my daughter Rebecca and my other daughter lives in San Francisco. Rebecca lives 5 miles away from where I live. We had connectivity during that period. All that said, everyone was struggling. kids were struggling. My grandkids were, doing Zoom in school. And so, the impacts of this phase of our life cannot be forgotten. And yet, when we went into the studio, all of that was momentarily forgotten. All of that sort of dissipated as we were able to do something creative and have some fun in doing it. And, with no expectations on the back end, didn't know how anyone would receive it. A lot of this I arranged on the spot. It's not as though we had been rehearsing for months to put this together. I did the instrumental CD in the wake of having worked in a rehearsal sense more completely on the vocal CD, and we said, let's just do some things that we want to do, some tunes that I like, honor some composers that I respect, and see what happens. And during the process, over a period of 3 days of recording, it was as though we were isolated from isolation.
Well, let's go farther and farther back and away from COVID. Let's get to your beginnings in Long Island. Talk to me a little bit about how you got the jazz bug.
It was something that was, I suppose, spontaneous, because I played by ear from the time I was very young. Before I can even remember, I'm told that I sat at the piano and played. My grandmother was a pianist, lived with us, and influenced certainly my interest in the piano. I do remember sitting on her lap and have those types of flashbacks that I'm sure everyone has who've been influenced by people who love music. But I played by ear, and I was growing up at a time when rock and roll was starting, so would have record players under the piano, and I'd be doing Little Richard stuff at the keyboard. But it didn't take long for me to find jazz as a teenager, really, and grew up in New York, and it was the haven for what was going on in jazz to a large degree. And as a piano player, I was influenced by who I thought were the very influential pianists at the time, whether it was Oscar Peterson or George Shearing, Bill Evans. They still continue to be muses for me. That was something that I just gravitated toward and started playing on my own. I wound up rebelling a bit sometime, in part because I liked to play baseball too, and I was playing baseball in high school. So I was rebelling against the classical training I had. And my mother found for me a pianist who played in the orchestras and pit bands on Broadway. And his name was Milton Krause. And so I agreed to continue my studies with him when I was in high school, thinking that he might feed into my natural inclination to be playing more popular things. As it turned out, he wound up providing me with a real grounding in music theory and discipline. It was very helpful to me in understanding better things that otherwise were coming more naturally to me, if you will. So that's sort of my background growing up in a quick overview, and you're welcome to drill down on any of that.
I do want to kind of get into your first show, or one of the seminal ones with Ahmad Jamal. Was that something that made you want to become a performer after that?
Well, I can't say that I had that inkling I want to be a jazz performer. I knew that I was going to be playing in bands, and I did that through, high school and particularly in college. I had this, I think, more practical bent too. When I was in college, I was an English major and a music minor. While I thought about graduate school in music and graduate school in English, I only got a scholarship to go to law school. My wife and I were about to get married and needed to support ourselves, and she was able to teach in New York. She was credentialed while I went to law school. So I chose to go to law school in lieu of pursuing a full-blown professional career as a pianist, and essentially put music on hold for a couple of years while I was in law school. And it wasn't until I came out to California and hooked up with some folks relatively quickly, and in a way my law practice dovetailed neatly with the opportunity to play music, because the clients I have served over 40 years were public agencies like the Golden Gate Bridge Authority, which runs a transit system in this region and runs the Golden Gate Bridge, and rail system that's here on the peninsula where I live. Their board members were comprised of elected officials, some of whom went on to serve in Congress and in the Senate. And to make a long story short, over time, the law practice and the music dovetailed, creating opportunities to perform, including at U.S. Senate retreats, as a result of relationships that I established through my day job, if you will. So over the years, we had a lot of local gigs and shows, but it was a subsidiary, if you will, to my life as a day-to-day lawyer working really, really hard. In the last 10 years, I've been able to devote, the proportion of time that I've spent on music compared to law is just a flip-flop of what it was for the 40 years before that. So particularly with Rebecca's arrival here to California and back home from New York, she had taught at the Actors Studio in New York for more than 10 years. When she came back home, then we changed everything. And with my bassist, Mario Sirachi, and drummer Bill Belasco, we began doing a lot more shows that changed, if you will, the focus of what I was doing musically to become something that I really, really like to do. So I've been an arranger and supporter of a vocalist, and it's a different technique and opened new doors, and we still have the instrumental opportunities, in each show as well.
What I want to know is the duality of being a lawyer and a jazz performer. How do both of those feed into each other and help the collective tree grow?
They really do dovetail. I've had this question before, and I've thought about it. I'm a transactional lawyer, and while I've overseen litigation and the strategy associated with it and members of my team for these large clients, I see my role as a lawyer as solving problems and being creative. It's not one to hound the opposition into submission as much as to do what's in the best interest of the people that I represent, to creatively bring solutions that are in the public interest. And I say public interest because I represent agencies that are serving the public, and that has been my focus. And a lot of that does require thoughtful, creative, improvised solutions. And so I think there's a correlation in that broad sense with the music that I play. At a technical level, that's how I would answer that question.
And in a very broad and simple way, why do you love jazz?
It merges classical roots with the opportunity to improvise. I think jazz foundationally to me is pegged to classical thinking of counterpoint and neat harmonic structures, but jazz gives you the opportunity to do that much more with it. It requires and evokes spontaneity. It offers the potential to interpret well-known tunes in ways that are different from the way they necessarily were written. Particularly, I think, harmonically. I've always been a fan. When I hear great jazz pianists or other instrumentalists make harmonic changes and substitutions in songs with which we're familiar, that always has stimulated me. That's something I'm very interested in and love to do. So to me, jazz it's freedom, it's expressive, it's lovely, and it's so broad-based to be able to cover so many genres in so many ways, so there's never a dull moment.
So if you have a dream tonight and you run into your younger self around the time that, you were really getting out there into the world and doing things, and you could give your younger self one piece of advice based on what you've learned all of these years, what would it be?
Maybe fewer billable legal hours and more focus on music. My bassist, Mario Sirachi, I don't know if you knew of him, but he was a very prominent bassist here, but he traveled all over the world. We played with Frank Sinatra, with Buddy Rich, even 2 years with Elvis Presley, and I had the unbelievable gift of having him at my side for almost 20 years before he passed away not long ago. And we were recording one day, and here's a guy who had played all over, really all over the world. He was we took a break during a session. We're standing outside, just the two of us, and he just looked at me and he said, if you hadn't had all those billable hours, this is what you should have been doing the whole time. You know, you don't know what you could have been. And I said, well, you know, every great baseball players, too, who, you know, get to AA or AAA, it's a huge leap no matter how many hours you put in to get from AAA to the majors and then to be good. So there's a reality check there. But I suppose if I were to look at my younger self, I really can't say I would redo anything because I've loved and benefited from everything that I've done. And I feel so fortunate that music is available to me now. And, you know, it's how many people can say when they, you know, I've reached a certain age, which is up there, right, at this point, that you keep learning and being inspired, that you're not just thinking of the past, you're thinking of the present and the future. And I think that's one of the benefits that jazz has provided. It's certainly one of the benefits that having my daughter with me has provided, this special bond where I don't feel that, you know, that I stagnate, and I feel that there's something to continue to look forward to no matter, regardless of age. And music gives you that opportunity of continuing to live and to continue to grow.
Everyone has a perception or an idea of who they think you are, your family, your friends, your fans, your clients, but ultimately you're living your life. Who do you think you are?
Just a short guy from Great Neck, New York, who had good luck my whole life and good fortune, and I'm a happy person and try to keep my sense of perspective and fairness and, you know, in everything that I do, and check my ego at the door and that sort of thing, and want to help and inspire other people to make make a contribution. And I think in my practice of law, I've had the opportunity to make a number of contributions that will be enduring in this region. And I think musically, I've given pleasure to some folks from time to time. I want to be a good person. I don't know how to answer that question any further. If you want to rephrase it.
No, that's great. That's a wonderful answer. Dave, thank you for taking a minute out to talk about the new album, about your life and music. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. It's so nice of you to reach out. I really appreciate it. I'm gratified. And it's nice to make your acquaintance, Joe.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest cats in San Francisco, Long Island, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Dave for his time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.